Most, if not everyone, has heard the claim of video games being used as a sort of escapism. Outlets to worlds that could be a way to separate oneself from reality, if only for a little bit. However, on select occasions, the game has more ties to the real world that act as a sort of anchor, to hold the player's sense of reasonable doubt, thus keeping a level of engagement. But if it wasn't already inherently obvious, some games or genres have more of a connection to the real world than others. From Sonic to an office simulator, there's variance between every game that reveals where it lies on the spectrum between the two extremes of wholly unrealistic to playing real life. Where do RPGs fall on the line then? I'd say they'd be right about the middle, give or take a few notches. But as a rule, RPGs as a genre perform quite the balancing act between realism and fiction. When an RPG streamlines mechanics or allows more encompassing freedom for the player, more than that in a bit, the elements that once made a game or franchise an RPG become more akin to action games or could be described as open world shooters, depending on what you're talking about. While on the other hand, the moment when too many aspects of life are implemented into the game, they can be deemed quite cumbersome to the point where it almost takes away from the actual experience. The player then loses any suspension of disbelief that separates the game from real life, thus becoming, like I said before, a life simulator. That's why I find it when it comes to determining the perfect balance between real life and a game, life should get on the field to make the character and the world that he inhabits as real as he can get through concepts such as time perhaps, before it starts either impeding on the theme of the given game or it gets apparently ridiculous and disparages the gameplay as a whole. And when it comes to the game, it should have mechanics and stories that pull you away from the real world, enough to suspend your disbelief and offset the realistic implementations drawn from real life. When it comes to me, I enjoy the aspect of RPGs that allows me to see a level of realism, while at the same time making the world somewhere only the imagination could reach, thus allowing the feeling of the only thing keeping me from doing what I'm playing in game is me not being in my character's shoes. Now, what I describe may not appeal to others, as many, if not most, prefer the idea of being placed in another person's shoes and being told their story like in The Witcher or Final Fantasy. It goes even further with players that build a character that isn't them at all, allowing the player to, of course, take upon the role of someone else. In other words, role-playing. Now, how does this concept connect to Bethesda titles? If you haven't played many or any of Bethesda's recent RPG releases, Bethesda has continuously gone down the route of streamlining their games. It is not to say that streamlining is inherently bad. The combat is quite up to par when it comes to Fallout 4, and the crafting system was so immensely improved from Fallout 3, in which I didn't even know you could craft until a few months ago, if that holds any weight to how much it improved. However, where there was a step forward, there were 2 steps backwards with this streamlining. The world, the story, the character progression, they all felt the effects of the Bethesda polish. Now, what about these streamlines are bad when other streamlines are good? The answer, I find, is limitations. Finally, we've gotten to the point of the entire video. It does not require a stretch of the imagination to see that the idea of limitations could be construed as something people don't want in their RPGs. We don't want our freedom stripped from us, and I can understand that. However, I think it will be good to hear why limitations are one of the main components of crafting a genuine RPG, as they are what give freedoms, especially that of choice, their true value. Think about it this way. Without predetermined limitations on what any one player can do during any one playthrough, what actual choice is there? For example, Strongback or Rifleman, Thieves Guild or Mages College, left or right? What weight do those choices have on your character when you're able to attain or do everything, being that the only limitation is the time a player has for the game? Without limitations on the stories the main character is able to be a part of, it leads to the whole debacle of how a mere adventurer can become God King over the entirety of the game, this aspect being most heinously committed by the Elder Scrolls. And where's the choice if one is able to be the jack of all trades and a master of not none but all? Not much freedom of choice from where I see it. Let me elaborate on both these topics in a little more detail. In role-playing games, the idea of having individuality among players in their playthroughs holds quite a weight of importance, especially when it comes down to the blank canvas character models that Bethesda uses for their RPGs. But in more recent installments of Fallout and Elder Scrolls, the idea of infinitely leveling became a mechanic, a legendary skill option in Skyrim, and the simply non-existent level cap in Fallout 4. At first, I can admit, I did appreciate those implementations. But as time went on, I realized how pointless it really was to have these systems in play, and how much they took away from the individuality of the character. I see it as pointless because I found the amount of content within each of these titles to not even be enough to get one close to getting everything. In my one playthrough of Fallout 4, I did everything the game had to offer in terms of side quests, main quests, DLC, exploration, yet I still only got to about level 115 in the approximately 270-280 hours I siphoned from that playthrough. And having the perk cap being just under 300 to max out your character, it confused me to why we were even given the option to have infinite leveling. I had done everything I could imagine to do, yet I only made it halfway to the max. There was simply not enough actual content, bar Radiant quests, which aren't really substantial, to even tease you to getting to the very end. Overall, I just found, like I said before, infinitely leveling to be borderline pointless. It's also, in my opinion, safe to say that this infinite leveling detracts from any individuality players might have, because it gets to the point where you start becoming that jack of all trades when you run out of perks or skills to invest in the moment you reach those higher and higher levels. If you choose to have any sort of build or role, suddenly all your associated skill trees are filled up, and you're left wondering why even continue leveling up. You do earn more in terms of Skyrim, health, stamina, or magicka, but those perks you get are just left sitting there until you delve into the other trees that you might not have originally considered investing in. This is one of the reasons I really enjoyed the class system from Oblivion. Forcing you to choose 7 major skills as the catalyst to leveling up really made your character your character. I've heard people say that having the freedom to hop between being a warrior to a mage to a thief at any given moment is a lot better than being pushed to one playstyle for a character, as you may find that you don't enjoy archery and want to become a spellcaster. And I can understand where they're coming from. It would be annoying to have to start all over because you ended up choosing the wrong skills or the like. However, I would like to say that there is a solution to somewhat remedy this concern. I thought about it for a while, and I came to the conclusion that I would amalgamate the Skyrim and the Oblivion leveling systems into one. There would of course be major skills. What would be different here is that they do not act as the only way for you to level up, like in Oblivion. Instead, they'd be the only skills you can invest perk points into and make legendary. I would keep the leveling from every skill aspect from Skyrim in, so you could go from firing spells to swinging an axe whenever you want without worrying about not leveling up. But where major skills come into play with leveling is that they are, like I said before, the only skills you can make legendary. So if you really do enjoy your build or playstyle, you're not forced to leveling the other skills to reach max level, like you were in vanilla Skyrim. Also, a footnote here. Making your skills legendary would not refund your perk points like they do now. It would act more like Paragon levels in that it's there only to further leveling rather than resetting your skills. So your perks would remain intact, but you would continue to gain experience. There would also be a class system like in Oblivion, and the option to choose your major skills would still be there as well. But this time, you get 6 major skills. I'd say the max level would be 85 instead of 81, and each skill tree would have 14 perk points in them. That's around the average amount of perk points in each skill tree Skyrim has now, lying at about 13.8. Therefore, having 6 major skills with 14 points in each tree, and the max level being 85, thus 84 perk points, you're able to fill out all 6 of your major skills when you reach max level. But to alleviate the whole idea of eventually disliking a certain playstyle, something like respecking or even changing your class can be implemented. You could use a currency, maybe a Dragon Soul, very much like they did in the Dragonborn DLC, and change your major skills, thus refunding any perk points, if allotted, to allow you to redistribute into a brand new major skill you choose. And the same thing can be done with a class trainer if one decided to go down the route of a specific class. Just go up to a class trainer and ask to become that class, and for a certain amount of gold they would change all 6 of your major skills to fit that class. You would then be refunded all your perk points, and then you can redistribute them as you will. I believe this system, if not something similar, would really allow more individuality when it comes to each player, while at the same time, it gives people who enjoy the freedom to maneuver between playstyles of one character the option to do so without any real negative effects besides the cost of respecking. And I recognize that there may be a few flaws with what I came up with, but everything has room for improvement. I realize that this second point may be a reiteration of a statement I made in a previous video, but I really feel that the story and the world that surrounds that story should be another limitation on the player when it comes to RPGs. The world, or even time itself, should not be reliant on you to occur. If anyone remembers high school, or is still in school, you may know that when it comes to linear graphs, if time is one of the variables, it is always the independent variable. Time does not depend on anything or anyone to continue. So I ask, why does or should time start and stop when I decide to get around to doing certain things in the story? This question I've asked myself is the reason why I feel the stories should either push you enough to complete them in a timely manner, or not have that sense of urgency, as I stated in the previous video. It doesn't make much sense to me how I could be tasked with assassinating the Emperor, being told he's going to be there for a few days, only to have me be able to walk over to Winterhold, become the Archmage, solve the Civil War problem, take care of the dragons, become the champion of every Daedric prince, and then be home in time to finish my initial task. Now I can see why many, if not most people, would utterly disagree with the notion of time not being on your side when it comes to RPGs, or even just Bethesda games. It would suck to miss out on a story because you took 4 days to get to Solitude instead of 3 to finish the major quest line. I can concede that in the very end, time being independent may result in some unfair resolutions or missed opportunities. It may just be a simple pipe dream for me and my unreasonable expectations. However, as I've said before, I believe that stories, at least the major ones, within Bethesda titles should run on a parallel with one another. At least most of them. By the time you finish the Dark Brotherhood story, the main quest may be already too far gone to allow you to start it up. Someone else turned out to be the Dragonborn in this playthrough, and you're able to perhaps complete the Dark Brotherhood and the Thieves Guild quests, while the Civil War is waged and the mages find the Eye of Madness in Saarthal. Then in your next playthrough, you dive headfirst into being the Dragonborn, and are also the reason the Empire maintained control over Skyrim by defeating the Stormcloaks alongside the dragons. The encompassing point here is that I want that sense of individuality between characters and playthroughs when it comes to RPGs, and allowing you as the player to do anything and everything is totally counterintuitive to the elements that make an RPG distinct from a fantasy action game. There seems to be a severe lack of consequences in your choices as of right now, with Bethesda games and the stories they've crafted and your ability to complete them all, regardless of your actions. It really soils the integral part of what it means to bear the title of RPG. I really hope you enjoyed this video, and please let me know what you think. If I missed anything or was a little unclear, which I have no doubt I have or was, please point it out. And when it comes to limitations, I'd like to know if you find them important, or do you see them more as inconveniences to be taken out? And if you have any questions, quarrels, or queries, be sure to let me know. I'm Cucumber, and remember, pass the dressing.